What's up everybody? So in this video we're going to be talking about pregnancy. This is a little bit of a tricky topic, but relative to spermatogenesis and oogenesis and all that, it's not as complicated, but there is some stuff you need to know for the exam. So let's try and make this as easy as possible for you. I think the best way to make this make sense is quickly reviewing the female reproductive system. So that's what we have here. So we're going to slice this female reproductive system open and take a look at some important names that we need to know, right? So here we are. So let's start with sperm. So sperm is released by the male, right? Into the female reproductive system. Where? Into this part here, right? We call this part here the vagina. Okay. Now, remember, there are many sperm at this moment, okay? But only one will survive the whole process, right? So the sperm, many of them, but we're just taking one for the sake of the explanation. And now it's going to swim up and need to pass through this narrower portion. We call this narrower portion the cervix, okay? Once it goes through the cervix, it enters this huge chamber here, this big chamber, which is called the uterus. This is where the baby is going to end up growing, right? This is where the baby is going to end up growing. Now, the sperm doesn't actually stay here. It swims into this tube called the fallopian tube. So you may wonder now, okay, why does it not stay in the tube? Like, why does it not stay in the uterus? Because that's where the baby is going to grow, right? So that doesn't make sense. Well, you'll see. You'll see when we get there. So it leaves the uterus into this oviduct, and now it's going to wait here. Okay. In the meanwhile, we know the ovary, we call this the ovary, is where oogenesis happens. This is the process of making the egg, right? The female sex cell. So now the egg is made and it's released. Now the egg and the sperm will meet. This is called fertilization. The sperm will pass its DNA to the egg. Now the egg is called the zygote because it's got DNA from both the egg, the male and the female, right? So this is now a unique cell called the zygote. The zygote will travel down this tube, divide and divide and divide, eventually entering the uterus, and then implants into this layer here. So it doesn't just stay in the uterus. In fact, it's going to implant into this red thick layer here called the endometrium. Okay, so it's going to come here and implant here and then divide, and basically eventually form a baby. Now, one more thing. This layer under here is called the myometrium. It is made up of muscle. This is the reason why females will have period cramps. They can have cramps, like painful cramps, because of this muscle contracting severely, okay? And you'll see why it contracts later in this video. So now we have one thing I need to make clear. So when the female, now we'll get to this in the next one. So if you understand all of these key terms, pregnancy should be very straightforward to you, the rest of it, okay? So all these names are very important, but if you know them, then the next part will make sense. So what we're going to do first is we're going to look at this scenario in terms of a person who did not get pregnant, and then we're going to look at the scenario in terms of a person who did get pregnant. If you can understand the difference between these two, it will make a lot of sense to you, okay? So let's start with a person who does not get pregnant. So here we have the ovary, right? It makes an egg. Now, there's a follicle, okay? The egg is inside the follicle, and eventually the egg is released. If you don't understand this, go watch oogenesis video. So the egg is released, and there's a remainder part, which we call the corpus luteum. So the corpus luteum will stay in the ovary for a while, okay, after the egg is released, because it has an important function. So the egg is released once a month, right? Once a month. Now the egg has the potential to become fertilized by a sperm, right? If a sperm enters the female, okay? Now, an egg can become a baby if a sperm is present, right? So the female's body has to prepare for that scenario. Okay, what if this egg gets fertilized? Then the female's got to be ready, right? So what do I mean by ready? We know eventually if this egg gets fertilized, it will implant into this endometrium, right? Into this layer here, okay? Because this is the location where the baby is going to grow. So what does this endometrium need to have to be ready? To be what I call ready. It needs to be ready, it needs to be thick, it needs to be full of blood vessels to supply all the nutrients possible for this future baby, right? So, when this egg is released, the corpus luteum has a very important job to prepare this endometrium in case the egg gets fertilized, in case there will be a baby. Okay, so how does it do that? So the corpus luteum will release two important hormones called estrogen and guess what? Progesterone. Okay, so just bear in mind there's basically vessels everywhere. So let's say we have a vessel here. It's obviously not this big, but for the sake of the explanation, we're going to say there's a vessel. Okay, so these hormones released by this corpus luteum, which is just a bunch of cells, will enter this vessel. Okay, now we know vessels can carry blood everywhere around the body, right? So let's say these hormones are now carried around and eventually they reach the endometrium. Okay, so here the progesterone and estrogen reaches the endometrium. And what they're going to do then is leave the blood, go into the endometrium, and basically tell this endometrium to wake up and start preparing. A baby might be coming. Okay, a baby might be on the way. So it's going to tell this endometrium, and this endometrium will grow a lot of capillaries, grow a lot of blood vessels to prepare to be able to support this future baby. Okay, so let me show you one quick thing here. So again here, so normally, what I'm trying to say is normally the endometrium is relatively thin, okay? So during most of the months, like during most days of the month when the female did not release the egg, the endometrium will just be quite thin because there's no egg on the way. But as soon as the egg is released, the corpus luteum will make those hormones, estrogen and progesterone, which will then tell this endometrium to get thick, right? Thick so that it can prepare for that egg, okay? Do you understand what I mean? That's what I mean by the endometrium is maintained. It's made thick and ready to receive the baby. Now, let's say the egg does not receive a sperm. So it travels down, no sperm ever came in. So the egg is going to come down, come down, come down. Now, this corpus luteum does not live forever, unfortunately. Just like all of us, it's going to die eventually. These cells are not going to live forever. So as long as they're alive, they will make progesterone and estrogen. So as long as this corpus luteum is alive, the endometrium will be thick and ready. But after a while, if the egg never met a sperm and it's been a long time, then the corpus luteum will die. Okay, it will die because there's nothing keeping it alive. Okay, it just has a set amount of time to live. So if no egg was met a sperm, then the corpus luteum will die. And if the corpus luteum dies, then guess what? Let me move this. If the corpus luteum dies, then guess what? Then this estrogen and progesterone is no longer there. If there's no estrogen or progesterone, then the endometrium will no longer be maintained. What does that mean? Let me go back to this picture. So that means if no sperm came, again, the the corpus luteum dies, no estrogen progesterone is made, and now the bleeding will start. At the end of each menstrual cycle, if the female did not get pregnant, this thick layer that was prepared will now get broken down. So this thick layer that was prepared in case the egg got fertilized will now be broken down. And now these muscles, these myometrium muscles, will contract so hard to squeeze all of this blood out, right? Because this endometrium is mainly a lot of blood and capillaries to prepare for the egg, for the baby. But now that there's no baby, we got to get rid of it. We got to restart. So this muscle is going to contract and help squeeze out all of this blood. And that's what's basically period blood. That's why women will have a period once a month if they do not get pregnant. So the blood will then leave through the vagina, and hopefully you'll have a tampon or something like that, which will catch up that blood. Okay, right? Okay, so this is what happens when you do not get pregnant. So this is most of the time, hopefully. Okay, so what happens when you get pregnant then? So let me show you. Let's recap it. So that was not pregnant. Now let's go pregnant. So again, this corpus luteum, okay, is making the estrogen and the progesterone, right? So it releases it into the bloodstream. Again, same thing. We're trying to prepare this endometrium, just like usual, in case the sperm comes. So now the egg comes. So let's say now, this is spermy. This girl got a man. Okay, so the sperm comes, it goes, and it meets the egg. They fertilize, and now we have a zygote. So let's move this out of the way. Let's say now we formed a zygote. So a zygote, remember, is a cell that has the DNA from both the sperm and the egg, from both the male and the female. Now this zygote, okay, is special. It's going to become a baby. So now this female is different from the previous one we talked about. This one will develop a baby. Okay, so it's very important in this female that this endometrium doesn't bleed away. It needs to stay this way so that the baby can survive. So now after around 24 hours, one day after the zygote is formed, it will divide. So after one day, you'll have now two-cell baby. Okay, we call this the two-cell stage. There is another name, but you don't need to know it, so don't worry. And then guess what? It's going to divide again. Now we have a four-cell baby. Okay, and guess what? It's going to divide again. Now we have an eight-cell baby. And guess what? It's going to happen again. Now we have 16-cell baby, and so on and so on and so on until we have a blastocyst. Okay, a blastocyst. This blastocyst is like 100 to 200 cells. Okay, so it's a 100 to 200 cells baby. It's going to lose this blue layer, by which time we call it a hatched blastocyst, but I'm just going to show you, but it doesn't matter. Don't need to worry about this. So eventually this 100 to 200 cell baby, now, let me move this down. Now it wants to implant into this endometrium, right? But luckily, because of these hormones, progesterone and estrogen, and this corpus luteum that made them, this endometrium is ready to receive this blastocyst. So the blastocyst can implant. There's a lot of capillaries, a lot of stuff to maintain all these cells that need to survive. So it's great. Everything is ready. But remember, in a non-pregnant person, the corpus luteum eventually died. So shouldn't that happen with this person as well? No. Okay, so why does this corpus luteum not die? This corpus luteum does not die because of this. In a pregnant patient, there is this blastocyst, whereas in the non-pregnant patient, there wasn't a blastocyst. This blastocyst is what's going to keep this corpus luteum alive. How? How does this happen? Once this blastocyst implants in this endometrium, it starts creating a very special hormone called HCG. Okay, we're gonna pretend it's this molecule here, HCG, and it looks like this: human chorionic gonadotrophin. It's a human because we're in a human. Chorionic is another name to call this blastocyst, and gonadotrophin is a molecule that stimulates this area here, the gonads. Okay, so how does it work? So as soon as this blastocyst implants, it's gonna send this HCG into the bloodstream. Okay, into the bloodstream. From the bloodstream, again, it's going to travel around the body. Eventually, it's going to reach the ovary. It's going to leave the ovary, and it's going to tell this HCG to stay the hell alive. You cannot die, my man. The HCG cannot die because the corpus luteum cannot die yet because we need it to maintain this endometrium. Otherwise, this baby will die. Okay, so that's why this corpus luteum does not die in a pregnant person. So in a non-pregnant person, this blastocyst was never formed. Therefore, the HCG was never made. Therefore, eventually the corpus luteum degenerated and died. But in a pregnant person, this blastocyst is formed. Hence, the HCG is made. Hence, it goes to the corpus luteum and tells it to stay alive. So it tells it to stay alive for a long time until the placenta can be formed. Okay, because the placenta will eventually take over the job of this corpus luteum and keep the baby alive, keep the endometrium maintained. Okay, but for the first 3 months, this corpus luteum is very important to help making these hormones to maintain this endometrium for the baby to stay alive. Okay, wow. So that's basically how pregnancy works. Now we know this endometrium will be maintained. This blastocyst will grow and grow and grow until we have a fetus and then a full-grown baby. So let me show you something real quick. So at this point, at around 7 days is when this blastocyst implants here. So 1 week. It takes 1 week for the blastocyst to implant here. So any baby that is less than 8 weeks old, we call an embryo. So this right here is an embryo. When it's 2 months old, it's still called an embryo. But when this baby is more than 2 months old, so more than 8 weeks old, we call it a fetus. So a fetus is just an older version of a baby. So the most young version is called the embryo. Then we call it a fetus after 2 months. Okay, so just know the difference between those two words. Okay, so HCG is crazy. You know how, we're gonna quickly transition to this. You know how you know whether or not your baby, whether or not you're pregnant or not. So this is a pregnancy test, and it's something you pee on. Let me explain real quick. Oh, sorry. So, I'm trying to make this sense. Okay, so you know how HCG is released into the bloodstream, right? We also have, so our bloodstream carries this HCG everywhere, including the ovary. But since we have a lot of HCG now, right, in the blood, normally the female doesn't have any HCG. You know how your blood gets filtered, your kidney will filter your blood and remove some molecules and stuff like that? Well, the kidney will filter and remove some HCG from the blood, right? Because you have so many of them. So some of them will get removed by the kidney and you'll pee it out. So guess what? In order to determine whether or not you're pregnant, we actually use the pregnancy test. You'll pee on it, and that pregnancy test will pick up this molecule. If this molecule is present, it means you're pregnant. Because when you're not pregnant, this blastocyst does not implant, and hence no HCG is made. So when HCG is pregnant, your pregnancy test will show 2 lines to show that you're pregnant. So this HCG is very important in pregnancy testing. So that's how they determine if you're pregnant or not, okay? Hope that makes sense. Okay, here we have another thing. Sorry, this thing is just going a bit nuts. Okay, here we have it. So two more things I want to show you. So here we have a side view. I hope you can understand this. This is a side view. Basically slice the human in half. And we can see this is their spine. This is the back. This is their booty. This is the front. And here we have a bunch of stuff. This is your intestine, so you poo out of here. Here's your anus. And then we have here the vagina. And this is the ovary. This is where the baby is going to grow. This is the bladder. This is where you pee from, right? And this is your pubic bone in the front. So notice how there's no baby here. Okay, so this stage here is a bit earlier. Here I have a picture of a slightly later stage. Same thing. We have the rectum. We have the spine in the back, booty, pubic bone, bladder. But notice, in the uterus, we have a teeny tiny baby, okay? And we have some key words we need to mention, okay? Umbilical cord. So wherever the baby, sorry, give me a sec. Wherever the baby is gonna implant, so let's say the baby implanted there, wherever it implants, right, eventually a cord will form between the baby and the mother. We call this the umbilical cord. We'll talk about this much more in the placenta. I'm gonna make another video on placenta, which will explain it and in much more detail and all of that. But just for now, know there's a cord called the umbilical cord, which connects the mother and the baby, and nutrients and things will pass through that. But don't worry about it too much, just know the name. Now, notice how the baby is in a sac. We call this sac the amnion, and the fluid inside the sac we call the amniotic fluid. Okay, so it's very small there, so I'll show you a new picture just now. But this fluid is very important. This amniotic fluid is very important. It's important for a main reason in that when a mother, like say she does exercise, she goes running and she bumps around, maybe she, gets pushed or something, it makes sure that the baby doesn't shake around and hit all the sides. If you're in water, it's very difficult for you to move quickly, right? It's where, think about it. If you're in water, and you get shaked around, the water slows you down, so you don't hit the sides as much, right? So the water is like cushioning. The amniotic fluid is like cushioning so the baby doesn't get damaged so easily. And you know how it's easy to lift things in water? It's easier to move in water when you can stand. It supports you a little bit. It makes you float a little bit. That's important for the baby to learn how to move. Because if there was no water, there'd be no like treading. The baby wouldn't be able to tread and move the water to get stronger. So it's important for 2 reasons. Okay, here we have another picture. Same idea, okay? So here we have the picture. This is a bit later. So you can see here's the spine again, the rectum. They poo out of here and you have to have the baby. And now it's much bigger. So this is much later in pregnancy. Again, here's the umbilical cord. Here's the placenta, which we'll talk about a lot in another video. But the placenta is basically fully formed after like 3 months, okay? So it becomes useful after 3 months. Now, last thing here is this, just some interesting ideas. So after around 1 month, the baby looks like this, okay? And its heart starts to pump. And the baby is around 5 millimeters. That's like half a centimeter. That's crazy small, right? So after an entire month, you're still very, very tiny. Now, after around 2 months, you start having arms. You notice how here we didn't have any arms or legs or anything. So after around 2 months, you start forming visible arms, okay? From this point on, 2 months, we call you a fetus, right? So when you start having arms and stuff, that's when we call you a fetus. And you're around 4 centimeters. So if we go back to this picture here, this was in fact a fetus because it's around 3 centimeters, okay? So here, finally, we have some definitions and terms, just some things to recap. Hope you can read them slowly by yourself. I hope this made sense. I'm going to make a very important video on placenta. This is a huge topic. So I didn't talk about much in this video because I'm going to make a whole video on the placenta in another video. Okay, so you got to check that out. Very important topic for the IB. So I hope this video made sense. I hope you understand pregnancy and how it works, the very key ideas. And we're going to talk about placenta, which is very important and related to this in another video.